Okay. So my second task for the day is to bring the message for the day. And today I want to talk about a courageous mother in the midst of fear. So what I'd like to do is to highlight one of the outstanding mothers from the scriptures. And since our focus this year is on encouraging the congregation to read through the Bible, to get into the Word, and I hope you've been doing that, I decided that we'd look into the Word together. So the scriptures I'm going to read will be on the screen. So this mother's story is more than an account of a mother's love. It's a narrative of God's sovereignty, of His ability to turn the plans of man on their head for the sake of His people. This is a courageous mother in the midst of fear. Her story started like all of our stories. People in search of a better life, a brighter future, just simply trying to put food on the table. What are we called? Immigrants. The patriarch Jacob, a grandson of Abraham, moved his entire family to Egypt during a time of severe famine, where his son Joseph was ruler, second only to Pharaoh himself. So let's pick up the story in Genesis chapter 50, verse 26. So Joseph died at the age of 110. The Egyptians embalmed him, and his body was placed in a coffin in Egypt. We'll continue into Exodus chapter 1, verse 6 and 7. In time, Joseph and all of his brothers died, ending that entire generation. But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. I hope we're doing the same. Many children, and if you're past childbearing age, many grandchildren. Amen? But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. So let's fast forward to more than 200 years later. These immigrants were enjoying the good of the land. They had settled in. They had been there for more than 2 centuries. This was now their land. This was the place where they lived, like most of us here. And then the unthinkable happened. Let's go over to Exodus chapter 1, verse 8 to 17. Eventually, a new king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. He said to his people, "Look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country." So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramesses as supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks and do all the work in the fields. They were ruthless in their demands. Then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. When you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live also. Let's jump down to verse 22. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people, throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live. So in an effort to curb the power and the population of the nation of Israel, Pharaoh settled on a plan to make them his slaves. But the more he oppressed them, the more they multiplied in number, until finally he issued a child murder edict to the midwives, and then eventually to all his people. His plan was to wipe out an entire generation. This was his only solution to what he considered a problem. We'll pick up the story in Exodus chapter 2, verse 1 to 9. About this time, a man and woman from the tribe of Levi got married. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was a special baby and kept him hidden for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a basket made of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. She put the baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. The baby's sister then stood at a distance, watching to see what would happen to him. Soon, Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked along the riverbank. When the princess saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby. The little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This must be one of the Hebrew children," she said. Then the baby's sister approached the princess. "Should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" she asked. "Yes, do," the princess replied. So the girl went and called the baby's mother. "Take this baby and nurse him for me," the princess told the baby's mother. "I will pay for your help." So the woman took her baby home and nursed him. What an incredible story. This mother who thought she was basically throwing her child's life away, throwing him to the wolves, she's going to set him down the aisle, the same Nile that the Pharaoh wanted all the babies to be drowned in. She's going to set him out on the Nile. I want to tell you her name. Her name is not mentioned in Exodus 2. It's not mentioned until chapter 6, where the descendants of Levi are listed. Remember, she and her husband are from the tribe of Levi. Her name was Jochebed. Her husband was Amram, and their children are Miriam, Aaron, and Moses. It was in this perilous time when Pharaoh issued an order to kill all male babies that Jochebed gave birth to her third child. And for 3 terrifying months, she was able to keep him hidden until she could hide him no longer. And so, to save her son's life and out of desperation and a mother's love, she crafted a plan to protect him and keep him from Pharaoh's death sentence. She placed him in a basket and released him on the Nile River. As I said, the same Nile where Pharaoh commanded that all those baby boys were to be thrown into. And the Nile wasn't some little river, tiny little river. It was a treacherous river stretching across many countries. Some parts, there were crocodiles in there. So she's trying to escape from the death sentence of Pharaoh, but in a way, she is just giving her own death sentence to her son. She didn't know the outcome. She didn't know if the basket would hold together. She didn't know if someone was watching. She didn't know if this was her last goodbye to her son. She didn't know if she'd ever recover from this trauma. She didn't know. She didn't know. But what she did know was that the God of her people promised a hope and a redeemer. And so she had the courage to place her child in a basket and trust God to keep his promise. This story tells us that the great thing is not so much who you are as what you do with your life, how you meet life's challenges and responsibilities. So what can we learn from Jochebed? I just want to highlight 3 qualities that exemplifies who she was, all she did, and what we can learn from her and be encouraged by. First, her courage. She must have dreaded the day that her baby would be discovered. And for 3 months, she was able to keep him hidden. Hidden from the prying eyes of nosy neighbors, hidden from the searching eyes of those who wanted to kill him, and toward the plan of God. How was that possible? To hide a baby who was constantly crying, who was constantly demanding attention. All you mothers know what I'm talking about. Were you able to keep your baby quiet? What do babies do? Eat, sleep, and cry. If they're not eating and sleeping, they're crying. Crying more than anything else. You wish they would sleep sometimes. But they're crying. And how can you hide their crying? How can you stifle their crying? So that's what this mother was faced with. It took a great deal of courage on her part. Exodus 2:2 says, she saw he was a special baby. She recognized that he was a fine child, destined for greatness, a gift from God. And such gifts are not given to be destroyed, but to be loved and nurtured and then given back to God, to be used by him to build his kingdom. So she devised a plan that was nothing short of divine inspiration. Where did such courage come from? She was a godly woman who feared and trusted God, and he gave her the courage and the ability to think clearly and creatively, thereby fulfilling God's redemption plan for Moses and his people. The God of Israel was more real to Jochebed and her husband than was the king of Egypt. She exemplifies courage to fear God rather than man, as well as steadfast faith in God's promises and his providences. Her faith. In all she did, her faith was pivotal. It is only because of her faith that we know of her at all. All her actions hinged on her faith in the love, power, and providence of God. Her unwavering belief in the promises of God, even in the face of Pharaoh's decree, stands as a testament to her great faith and the power of a mother's love. Her faith was not passive. It was an active engagement with God's promises, even when those promises seemed distant and improbable. She was a fearless, focused woman of faith. She teaches that faith often requires us to take steps that seem counterintuitive. Steps that, when we're following God and we hear from him, we may be thinking, was that really God speaking? Because what he tells us to do sometimes seems so different from what we're accustomed to that we're doubting, did I really hear from God? Did he tell me to do this? Is this where he's leading me? But she was obedient. And so that's what we're all asked to do. Mothers, fathers, all of us, we're all asked to be obedient when we know that we're following God. So even when what we're asked to do does not make sense to us, if we know we have heard from him, we obey. So like Jochebed, we should trust that God's plan for our lives and the lives of those we love encompasses far greater horizons than we can see. Her godly parenting. In the few years that Moses spent with his mother, he learned Hebrew history, developed loyalty to his people, and understood the call to deliver them. She instilled in him the faith and identity that would later define his leadership and mission. She took mothering very seriously, nurturing her kids in the Lord with conscientious devotion. She didn't have 18 years with Moses, just until the time that he was weaned, which may have been any time between 8 to 12 years. So she didn't have a long time with him. Hopefully, most of us have until they're 18, and after that, everybody wants to go on their own. Some before, but hopefully, at least until 18. But what was most important is that we train them up in the formative years, in the early years. So this underscores the profound influence that parents have in shaping the faith and destiny of their children, and the importance of training them up from an early age. Jochebed got the opportunity to bring up this child too. Remember, she had 2 older children in the ways of the Lord. She was parenting the way King Solomon later advised, to train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And you know the story of Moses. You can see that he learned well from his mother. If he did not have this time with his mother, he would never have known about his people and about the faith of the God that they serve and the promises of that God, which would lead him to later become the Moses that we know, the Moses who led his people out of Israel. He understood why he was to do that. God saw Jochebed's heart. God heard her prayers and intervened on her behalf. Her fame lives on through the lives of her remarkable children. God used her courageous acts to position her son Moses in the house of Pharaoh, that same Pharaoh who had ordered his death. God honored her steadfast purpose by using that same son Moses to deliver the Hebrews from Egyptian servitude, and by appointing her older son Aaron as first high priest, and by making her daughter Miriam a leader of the Hebrew women. Her entire tribal family was selected by God to lead the rituals of worship for his people. Remember, she came from the tribe of Levi. Jochebed's name, which means Jehovah glorified, and her actions offer enduring lessons about trusting in God's plan, even when it leads us into the most terrifying of waters. Her story is a clarion call to all of us navigating the difficult times and uncertain waters of our lives, reminding us that faith in God's promises can transform fear into fortitude and trials into triumphs. Anyone feel like you're drowning in fearful, difficult, uncertain waters? You feel like you can hardly come up for air sometimes, not knowing what your next step should be, where to turn, what to do? God gave Jochebed the supernatural strength to lay her son down and let go of control. Many times, that's the hardest thing for us to do. We still hold on to the children for way too long, don't we? Not willing to release them, to let them go, to let them be their own people, the people that God created them to be. We think we are better than God and we can do better with them than He can. Anybody feel that way, or that's only me? So God gave Jochebed the supernatural strength to lay her son down and let go of control. He can do the same for you. Are you ready to relinquish control of your situation, to turn it over to the God you can trust? Are you ready to give God control of your life? To place your life in His hands, knowing that He is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that you can ask or think, according to His power working in us. Know that God loves you. Mothers, fathers, everyone in here, those listening online, know that God loves you and He cares about you and He wants the best for you. He has the best to give you. He's merciful, He's just and kind. If you're feeling overwhelmed and discouraged on your journey, remember that God works for the good of His people. When you reach out to Him, He hears, He sees, He knows, but He needs your permission to act. Do you realize that? Many people say, well, God knows what I need. Yes, He does. Because we are His creation. He created all of us. He knows our thoughts. He knows what we need. But when we go to Him in humility, asking Him to intervene on our behalf, then He can act on our behalf. Until then, He is just, as some people think, a superpower. But He's a loving God who loves each one of us with an everlasting love and wants the best for us. There is no limit to what God can do through you when you give your life to Him. When you read the story, you can't help but be amazed at the outcome of it. She thought that she was condemning her baby to certain death. But instead, she was able to raise him in the formative years of his life. And guess what? She was paid for doing it. She was paid for babysitting her own son. Isn't that amazing? This is what God can do. This is what happens when we put our lives in God's hand. Only He can do this. And this is what this mother did. And then he grew up in the palace of Pharaoh, in opulence and wealth. He wanted for nothing. But he had those formative years with his mother. Mothers, don't ever despise the time you spent with your young children. We all know how difficult it is with young children. And every year, a different problem arises. You go through a different stage with them. But be patient. Wait on the Lord. Ask Him to give you the strength to bring them up in the fear and admonition of the Lord. So he grew up in opulence and wealth in the house of the man who had ordered his death. Ironic, isn't it? He got the best education in the land. This is the providence of God. And he did it for Joshua, and He can do it for every one of us in here. Mother, He can do it for you. Give those children over to Him. Give Him control of your life and give those children over to Him. Yesterday in our Mother's Day celebration, we had a wonderful time. And thank you. And the theme for yesterday was, Blessed is the mother who puts her trust in God. Can you recognize that in Joshua's life? This was a mother who put her trust in God. And today I want to encourage every mother here. Whether you have the best of children or you're going through certain situations with your children, you're constantly praying for them, and that's what you need to do. You need to be on your knees for your children. Whether they're good or they've been led astray somehow, continue to pray for them. Continue to be on your knees for them. No matter how old they are, continue to pray for them.